on to the first story this hour, where the International Monetary Fund slashes its global growth forecasts.
In advanced economies, growth is now too low to make a substantial dent in unemployment. And in major emerging markets, growth, which had been strong earlier, has also decreased.
Well, the IMF made the announcement in a report released in Tokyo. It cut its growth forecast for this year to 3.3% from its July estimate of 3.5%. Asia is still leading the pack of expanding regions, while Europe will contract an expected 0.4% this year. Now, the fund is also warning that things could get much worse if the Eurozone crisis is not quelled and if Washington fails to reverse the looming fiscal cliff austerity plan. The IMF says it's imperative for the United States to avoid excessive fiscal consolidation in 2013.
In advanced economies, growth is now too low to make a substantial.
Well, let's switch over to Washington. We're joined by author and historian Mr. Webster Tarpley. Thanks so much for joining us, Dr. Tarpley. Now, when we look at this last forecast, the most recent forecast by the IMF, are you surprised at all at the forecast, and what exactly does it really mean for Western European countries as well as the United States?
Well, the International Monetary Fund has a tragic criminal track record. They're a bastion of incompetence and meddling in the internal affairs of sovereign states. So every time they make a forecast, we can be sure there's some ulterior and probably evil motive behind it. In this case, they seem to be pushing the United States in particular towards a policy of genocidal, brutal, drastic, savage austerity on the home front. Not with the idea that that will get the United States out of a depression, but that that will strengthen political forces that the IMF would like to support. They're also looking at Europe. Europe finds austerity, which is what the IMF always recommends, to be very controversial. We just had 2 weeks ago a series of mass protests in Greece and Spain and other countries saying no to austerity. So the mood to reject austerity, genocidal austerity in my view, is growing across the world. So the IMF is intervening right now with this kind of a forecast.
So you think with their intervention, are we likely to see similar policies that have been implemented in Europe, implemented in the U.S.?
Well, we have what they talk about is the so-called fiscal cliff. The fiscal cliff is a favorite slogan, really, of reactionary Republicans who want to use the idea that there'll be some tax increases and some budget cuts at the end of this year as a cause for panic and hysteria so that they can get what they want. I think this is really ultimately baseless. We can look at the possible economic policies and sort of evaluate them. It's very simple. One is a deflationary policy with austerity and budget cuts. That's been tried in Greece. It's been tried to some extent in the United Kingdom. It's a complete failure. It makes the depression worse. Here in the U.S., we've had two different options that have been exercised. One is the consumer-led recovery, the sort of Keynesian stimulus, which was the stimulus at the beginning of the Obama administration. That has some positive effect, but it tends to be limited and it tends to run out very fast. Other than that, we have the hot money approach, right? The quantitative easing 2, 3, and so forth. That also doesn't work because it simply sends masses of hot money to overseas exchanges. The fourth one is the one that hasn't been tried. That's the New Deal recovery, the kind of thing we had here in the United States where you begin to build infrastructure, you rebuild your highway system, your railroad system, your dams, ports, water systems, public housing, schools, hospitals, and telecommunications. With that, you actually get a recovery because you're investing in capital goods. And the thing that we can add to the New Deal experience today is that the infrastructure program should be financed by 0% credit over a 100-year maturity, if necessary, through the central bank. So the IMF, again, has no idea how to get out of a depression. Everything the IMF says makes it worse, and all of their forecasts are politically motivated.
All right, well, thank you so much for being with us. We're out of time. Author and historian Webster Tarpley, appreciate you being with us.